The senator from New Mexico.
Madam President, I'd like to speak briefly on the New START treaty and state the reasons why I believe the Senate should go ahead and ratify this treaty. Let me highlight some key points on, first, what the treaty accomplishes. Let me mention four things. Number one, it reduces the number of deployed nuclear warheads by a relatively small number. That is, it takes us from 2,200, which is what we're required to reduce to under the Moscow Treaty, down to 1,550. Second, its counting regime is not based on attributing a number of warheads to a launch system, but instead, like the 2002 Moscow Treaty, this treaty actually requires the counting of deployed warheads. Third, this treaty reestablishes a verification regime of inspectors on the ground. This is something which lapsed a year ago when START 1 lapsed. And fourth, this treaty still maintains a credible nuclear deterrent against Russia, against China, against anyone who might threaten our country. Before discussing some of these points in detail, let me put the New START treaty in some historical perspective, at least as I see it. As this chart graphically demonstrates, at the peak of the Cold War some 30 years ago, there were about 60,000 nuclear warheads. That's clearly an astounding number, given that a single warhead would destroy most major American cities and most major cities anywhere in the world. From 1991, when the first START treaty was signed, until 2002, when the Moscow Treaty was signed, the number of warheads declined dramatically from about 50,000 to a little over 20,000, or about 10,000 for the United States and 10,000 for Russia. This includes spare and deployed warheads, not just those that were deployed. The Moscow Treaty took this count further down and allowed 2,200 to 1,700 deployed warheads. When additional spares of about 3,300 were included, the number somewhere between 5,500 and down to 5,000 warheads for each nation. If the New START treaty is ratified, as shown on this chart, down here where this arrow is in the right-hand bottom corner, in 2010, it will take the number of deployed warheads to 1,550 from the lower limit of 1,700 that was in the Moscow Treaty. That's a very modest reduction compared to what has been done in previous arms control agreements. After the Cold War ended 20 years ago, it was clear that we had an astounding and excessive number of nuclear weapons. I believe it was the hope and the expectation of most Americans that there would be deep reductions in nuclear weapons at that time. That reduction, in my view, has been slow in coming. Our government has declassified the number of nuclear warheads we have in our active stockpile, and that number is 5,113. If asked directly, I believe most Americans would be surprised to know that here at the end of 2010, we still have over 5,000 nuclear warheads, and we have 2,200 that are deployed. Today we have a treaty before us that achieves a modest reduction from the Moscow level of 2,200 deployed warheads. As I indicated before, this treaty will take us down to 1,550. Quite frankly, I'm surprised that some are arguing for having a drawn-out debate over the treaty. START 1 took about 4 days of floor debate and lowered the number of warheads between Russia and the United States from about 50,000 to 20,000, a 60% reduction. The Moscow Treaty lowered the total number of U.S. warheads from about 11,000 to today's level of about 5,000. That took 2 days of debate, and that involved a 55% reduction. Yet with the relatively modest reduction called for in this treaty, we still have people proposing a floor debate that could extend into the next Congress. Let me turn to a number of substantive issues associated with the New START treaty that I believe weigh in favor of its ratification by the Senate. First, we have been briefed by the military commanders about the 1,550 deployed warheads that will still be in place once this treaty is approved. This total is comprised of about 700 deployed ICBM and SLBMs and about 800 total heavy bombers and launchers. I urge my colleagues to obtain the classified briefing on the treaty. I believe it's clear that the commander of U.S. Strategic Command has analyzed in detail the strategic nuclear force structure of each side under this treaty and is confident that we can maintain our deterrence against Russia and China, who hold 96% of the world's strategic nuclear warheads. The resolution of approval, as reported by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, speaks to this issue, noting in Condition 3 that before any reductions in deployed warheads are made below the current Moscow treaty level, the President must notify Congress that such reductions are in the national security interests of the United States. Second point is that the intelligence community has judged that we're better off with this treaty and its inspection regime than we are without it. Monitoring and verification under START 1, which has now expired, was based on counting strategic launch systems and then attributing a number of warheads to each submarine, each airplane, each missile. This counting rule overestimated the number of warheads carried on U.S. strategic systems. The new START treaty is much more specific than START 1. It counts only the actual number of warheads carried by each deployed missile. In fact, this is the same counting rule as in the Moscow Treaty, which was developed by the prior administration and subsequently approved here in the Senate 95-0. Moreover, under this treaty, we have the ability to inspect on the ground with short notice whether uniquely coded launchers actually carry the declared numbers of warheads. Contrary to what some have claimed, short notice inspections of uniquely identified launchers combined with other intelligence assets give us a high probability of detecting cheating, such as uploading of more warheads, which would take days to months for Russia to achieve. Condition 2 of the resolution of approval out of the committee speaks to the monitoring issue by requiring the President to certify that our national technical means or other intelligence assets combined with our on-the-ground verification capability is, quote, sufficient to effective monitoring of Russian compliance with the provisions of the treaty. Third, there's the large policy issue of strategic stability. This treaty provides a framework of transparency through inspections and accountability of warheads and launchers. If we're worried about unchecked growth of Russia's strategic nuclear forces, not now, but 5 years from now, it makes great sense to approve this treaty. Many have criticized the treaty because it does not deal with Russia's numerical advantage in tactical nuclear weapons, such as gravity bombs or submarine-launched cruise missiles. I would point out that none of the previous nuclear arms control treaties have dealt with tactical nuclear weapons. While I agree that we should have discussions with Russia on tactical nuclear weapons, we need this treaty to restart the process of negotiations if we are ever going to achieve the goal of reducing tactical nuclear weapons. This treaty lays the groundwork for a subsequent negotiation to address tactical nuclear weapons, many of which are deployed close to our NATO allies. And if we cannot demonstrate that we have the ability to enter into binding obligations on strategic nuclear forces, which are the most easily verifiable, how can we advance to the next step with Russia on reducing their tactical nuclear weapons, which number in the thousands and which are the most easily concealed of the weapons. Fourth point, let me turn to the issue of modernization of our own nuclear arsenal. Despite our unsustainable budget deficit, and I notice the senator from Alabama is here on the floor today. He and I both voted against the tax bill. I don't know all of his reasons. One of mine was the unsustainable deficits faced by this country today. But despite these unsustainable budget deficits, this administration is committing an additional $14 billion over the next 10 years for a total of $84 billion to modernize our nuclear weapons enterprise to ensure that as we draw that nuclear arsenal down, reduce the numbers in the nuclear arsenal under New START, we will be capable of maintaining those weapons that we do rely upon. Now, this chart shows the 10-year projection for weapons stockpile and infrastructure funding. And you can see that there is a very substantial commitment of funds by this administration to maintain the reliability of our stockpile. The fifth point I wanted to make is the concerns have been raised regarding the non-binding Russian unilateral missile defense statement. This is separate from the binding provisions of the treaty. This is a non-binding statement that Russia made that it considers the treaty effective only where there is, as they put it, no qualitative or quantitative buildup of the missile defense capabilities of the United States of America, end quote. In testimony before the Armed Services Committee, Secretary of State Clinton stated unequivocally that the treaty does not constrain our missile defense efforts. Secretary Clinton went on to say that Russia has issued a unilateral statement expressing its view, but we have not agreed to this view. We are not bound by it. In fact, we have issued our own statement making it clear the United States intends to continue improving and deploying effective missile defense. In the same hearing, Secretary of Defense Gates said, quote, "The treaty will not constrain the United States from deploying the most effective missile defense possible, nor impose additional costs or barriers on those defenses." Secretary Gates, in that hearing, he went on to say that, quote, "As the administration's ballistic missile defense review and budget makes clear, the United States will continue to improve our capability to defend ourselves, our deployed forces, and our allies and partners against ballistic missile threats." From a historical perspective, I'd note that similar unilateral statements on missile defense were made by Russia in connection with START 1, in connection with START 2, both of which treaties were approved by the Congress. Consistent with the statements that Secretaries Clinton and Gates made, the Foreign Relations Committee's resolution of approval contains an understanding included in the instrument of ratification that, quote, "It is the understanding that the New START Treaty does not impose any limitations on the deployment of missile defenses other than the requirement of paragraph 3, article 5, and that section of the treaty prohibits the use of existing ICBM and SLBM launchers for missile defense or the conversion of missile defense launchers for ICBMs, except for those that have been converted before the treaty was signed." On the question of whether we should vote on the ratification in this Congress or leave this to the next Congress, some senators have claimed that we simply need more time. Other treaties have laid before the Congress for longer periods, but this is simply not the case. Arms control treaties since the ABM Treaty in 1972 were either taken up, debated, and ratified within the same Congress, or in the cases of START 2 and the Moscow Treaty and the Chemical Weapons Treaty, they were taken up, debated, and approved within the Congress from which the Foreign Relations Committee reported a resolution of approval. This historical precedent on the ratification of arms control treaties runs counter to what some of my colleagues have been advocating it is this congressional session of the Congress that received the treaty, that held 21 hearings and briefings on the treaty, that submitted over 900 questions as part of the advice and consent process, and it should be this congressional session of the Congress that should finish the job. Mr. President, let me conclude with where I started. That is that the New START treaty is a relatively modest treaty in terms of the reduction in the numbers of nuclear warheads. Our military commanders have analyzed the force structure under the treaty. They've concluded it maintains our nuclear deterrent. It provides on-the-ground intelligence through verification that the intelligence community believes will allow us to be better off with these provisions than without them. Finally, Mr. President, it's clear that this treaty does not impede our missile defense programs. In my opinion, there is no credible argument I've heard that the ratification of this treaty would undermine our national security. I urge my colleagues to vote for the ratification of the New START treaty. I thank the chair. I yield the floor.